I would have to say, I think a huge part of it is the diet. You know, our diet is just so meat heavy, and of course meat has no fibre, and what runs our entire digestive system is fibre. And the only place
Fibre,
you get...
just to
Yeah.
clarify for people, fibre, what foods would they be?
Yeah, so you only get fibre in fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and legumes. So there's 6 food groups, and when I say legumes, I also mean beans, which are, you know, debatably part of the group or not, but you know, kind of have beans in that area. So when you look at fibre in the gut, fibre runs your digestive system, it runs your liver, it cleans all the waste from the liver, all the fatty waste and cholesterol and everything the body wants to get rid of, it goes into the liver, and only insoluble fibre on the outside of fruits and vegetables and nuts, seeds can get that into the bowel and remove it. The insoluble fibre is your bowel motion. So it's why, you know, when I look at, because to me I connect constipation in New Zealand, which is a lack of bowel motions, and you know, my recommendation is 3 times a day. That's the human colic gastric reflux. That's the way human beings have always gone. When you're eating enough fibre, you'll go 3 times a day. Most people go once a day because they're not having enough fibre. So I put down a mixture of different things in New Zealand. One is the high levels of constipation. Number 2 is the low levels of fibre, which of course lead to constipation. And that then damaging the gut and leading to a very unhealthy microbiome. And the microbiome, of course, creates your serotonin, which is your happiness, you know. So it's actually quite simple when you look at it. You know, now is this the whole solution? Of course not. There's all kinds of socio-economic realities. There's unfair social policies in New Zealand. There's inequitable income. You know, there's all of the rich and the poor. There's all of that side of it as well. And that's a whole other conversation that I'm not an expert in, so I don't talk too much because it's not an area of expertise for me. But the area that I do see why depression rates are on the rise in areas like the UK and Canada and America and right through Europe and Australia and New Zealand, all these Western countries, is because what we're eating is fueling sadness, and sadness in a weak gut health leads to unhappiness in the brain and suicide and depression. So I think there's a huge causality there, and I may get yelled and screamed and pillared at for saying this, but to me this will be standard science in 10 or 20 years. The first thing to realise is that alcohol is a depressant. So alcohol causes depression, and alcohol depresses human beings. So we know that.
So depressant, and is that kind of what it does?
It's a depressant. It's what they call. It's what it does in the brain. You know, the thing with alcohol is it's one of only 2 things that I know of that cross the blood-brain barrier. You know, some drugs do. Alcohol does, and of course that's why we drink. We drink to get away from where we are. You know, what alcohol does is it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and then you're not here anymore. You know, the whole thing about you when you're sober, you come back. You know, you look at our language. We even talk about come back. We need him sober. You know, because when you drink, the blood-brain barrier gets crossed. That's what alcohol does, and it changes your perception, and so it removes you from where you are, which is why it's used then as an excuse for bad behaviour. You know, I raped this woman, I was drunk. I killed this man in my car because I was drunk. I bashed this guy in the head with a beer bottle because I was drunk. I beat up this poor woman. I smashed my child. Or whatever. You know, it's used as an excuse. And we use it as an excuse, and we all have this kind of combined agreement that it's okay as an excuse because you're not there anymore. It's the alcohol that did it. You know that whole conversation we have where, it's not the alcohol. The alcohol just brings up whatever's there, where the alcohol lets loose and takes away your inhibitions. So it's more you, if you could argue it's more you. But alcohol removes you from where you are. So, you know, it's a depressant, so it brings you down. It's a downer, and it removes you from where you are. And so, you know, anyone who's depressed or has got any kind of mental imbalance, as far as I'm concerned, the first piece of advice I'd give, you can't touch alcohol ever again. You know, if you want to have a healthy brain, stop with the alcohol, because the alcohol crosses the blood-brain barrier. It messes with who you are and how you are in the world. So to me, alcohol is a no-go, and I gave up alcohol at 18, so I'm sober for 35 years. So I can vouch for, you can have a great adult life. You can have a great, I party, I can out-party anyone. I can go all night, you know, and I don't drink. So, you know, you don't have to have alcohol to party and have a great time. You know, and sing songs and party with people, go to nightclubs, have a great time and dance all night. And, you know, there's a wonderful change in culture around that, where there's a lot of events now which are alcohol-free. And that's just a wonderful, you know, wonderful youthful generation who are now bringing in that you don't need alcohol to have a great time. And I welcome it, you know, because when I gave up alcohol in 1985, it was pretty weird, you know. So, you know, when we look at alcohol, we look at, for example, Russia is a good example. 20% of Russian teenagers suffer from depression. It's one of the highest rates in the world. So 20%, it's 1 in 5. And we look at the global teen, you know, suicide average is 10 per 100,000. In Russia, it's 200% higher than that. and they've got one of the highest levels of alcoholics in the young people, you know, in terms of their alcohol intake. And their life expectancy in Russia is 66, you know. And what is the one thing that you connect with? Whenever you think of Russia, what is the one product you connect with most? When you immediately think of Russia, what do you think of?
Vodka.
Vodka, right, yeah. It's that much part of the national psyche, you know. And yet it causes chaos, you know. There's more alcoholic children in Russia than anywhere in the world. You know, there's children aged 14. It's awful. And, you know, is that matched with the massive suicide rates and the massive depression rates? Of course it is. You know, we know what alcohol does to the brain. I mean, in New Zealand, 1 in 3 students, if 3 students go out drinking and they get blind drunk in New Zealand and they pass out and they vomit, 1 in 3 keeps drinking. They wake up in a pool of vomit, having passed out and blacked out, then they carry on drinking. 1 in 3, 30%. I mean, you would think that if you passed out, you couldn't remember what you did and you vomited, you woke up in the street, you'd stop drinking. But no, they then carry on that very night. They wipe their mouth and carry on. You know, it's, you know, New Zealand women's binge drinking has quadrupled in the last 10 years. I mean, the alcohol culture in New Zealand is completely out of control. Young New Zealand women now drink 4 times higher than any other group of people. So you've got this young group of women, age, you know, between period and first baby. That is the highest risk period for breast cancer, is between first period and first baby. And for most women, that's between about 14 and about 30. You know, that's about the age group. That is the biggest risk for breast cancer when it comes to women in terms of triggering or growing breast cancer. Now, we know that alcohol is one of the biggest triggers for breast cancer. And yet, we know that when young women binge drink, that's the age they do it at. Right there, when they're at the highest risk for stimulating breast cancer. You know, the numbers off the top of my head, I think it's 2,000 a year. Now, cases of breast cancer in Australia every year, just in one country from alcohol alone, in young women. You know, young women are drinking themselves to death. And this is all part of this young generation that's growing up with this kind of the freedom around alcohol that didn't used to be there. So does alcohol feed into it? Yes, it does massively. So it's pertinent, and it's a hard one to ask, and it's a hard one to talk about, because alcohol has become such a part of our culture, much like cigarettes were. But we tackled cigarettes in the West by raising the age, you know, by taxing them, by giving education about the health, you know, fallout. But, you know, in New Zealand, breast cancer and bowel cancer are through the roof. You know, 1 in 7 women with breast cancer and bowel cancer, #1 rates on planet Earth. We have one of the worst binge drinking cultures in the world. And we have alcohol available everywhere. And we voted for the drinking age to go down 10, 15 years ago. I voted against it. Even as a young man, I voted against it because I knew what it would do. It would just create more young people drinking, not less. So alcohol has a lot to play in this. And the key thing with alcohol that people underestimate is that it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So if you've got weakness in the brain, or if you haven't got enough serotonin, you haven't got that balance with oxytocin and dopamine, you start feeding a lot of alcohol, you will weaken the brain, you will weaken the decisions. And of course that then leads, you know, to mental health problems and unwellness. So alcohol has a big role to play.